Are you a beginning knitter and it seems like knitting takes forever? Wish you could finish your projects faster? Today I'll show you some simple tricks to speed up your knitting, and you won't sacrifice quality while you're doing it. When you finish this, you'll be knitting faster and smoother, so let's go. Your yarn tension is very important, and how you hold your yarn matters. If you hold it too loosely, so that it's just dangling down, you have to pick your wool up each time, hard to wrap it around your needle, and your stitches you make will be just too loose. And see how much slower it makes it all to do. And you don't want that. If you hold it too tight, then you'll be really pulling, and you can often do this out of tenseness when you first begin knitting. The problem with this is that if your stitch is too tight on this needle, when you come to try to get it in there, you can hardly get it in. It makes it really difficult to knit, and again, that slows you right down. The best tension is to hold your wool firmly enough so that it keeps it in a straight line, so there's a little bit of tension on there, but if you pull, it will slide through. Sometimes people like to just wrap it around their finger a little bit and hold it. Some people just hold it in their hand like this. It really doesn't matter the method that you use. Just get used to that idea of it being fairly taut. If it lays straight next to your needle with a little bit of tension, but you can slide it through as you knit, then your tension will be just about right. Sometimes your choice of needles as well can affect your knitting, and also your choice of wool. So let's look at the needles first. There are different kinds. These actually are plastic. They're not very slick, and so actually these are slowing down my knitting a little bit. You can buy needles in metal or bamboo. So I find the metal ones tend to be the fastest to knit on. As you knit, probably not when they're brand new, but as you knit with them, the movement, the constant movement of the stitches seems to polish them so that the stitches will slide easily on and off, and that will really speed up your knitting. Another kind of needle you can knit on is a circular needle, which is what I have here. This also has bamboo points. Bamboo is a common type of needle you can buy. I don't know a lot about bamboo needles. I don't knit on them a lot, so if you've used them, that would be great if you commented and let people know whether or not you think that you can knit faster with them. But the circular needle in general is quite slow to knit with, I find. They're kind of clunky to use. The wiring part is awkward and gets in the way. You can't hold the needles in a convenient way to where you can get any speed up when you're knitting. So I find this a much slower way of doing any knitting at all, and usually I don't knit on circular needles. I actually had to buy this one especially so that I could demonstrate this for you. I know some people love these, and everybody has their own opinion about things. I'm just not a fan. I am including a link to this particular needle if you're interested in it. There's nothing wrong with this brand of needle, it's just that I don't like circular needles and find them very slow. So if you're trying to knit faster, a circular needle is not the way to go. The other problem with circular needles is they just have this short part. That means that a lot of your stitches have slipped onto this thin wire. And so there's also the added thing where you have to kind of coax these back onto the thicker part of the needle. And again, that's going to slow down your knitting. Circular needles are not going to help you to knit faster, so I would avoid these. And the other thing is your choice of wool. Some wool, like this one actually, is a prime example of this. It splits really easily. It's quite easy for me to put my wool in and it actually split the stitch. And I've actually done that several times while I've been knitting this hat. Do you see there how that wool is split when I went to knit it? You find it usually with this chunkier kind of wool, and also wool you can see where it would open really because it's got two colours blended together there. So that varies wool by wool. If you buy wool like this, you just have to slow down a little bit when you're knitting. The next tip will make a big difference if you're willing to try it. Do you know there are actually two styles of knitting? Well, there may be more, but two main ones that I know of. So the first one is English knitting, and that's what I'm doing here. I am English, this is the way I learned, and this is what I've been doing all my life. And the difference is basically, you hold the needles basically in the same way, but you work the wool with this hand. So I'm always going into my stitch around with this hand, pulling it through and off. The Continental way is actually much faster. Okay, so for Continental knitting, you hold your wool in the opposite hand, and then they often have a little ring they wear on the finger that holds this wool really nicely on this finger for them, but I don't have one of those. Your wool is still behind your work for this knit stitch. So when you knit like this, because you're holding it in this hand, when you put your needle in there, the wool is there ready for you to grab it and pull it through. So can you see where that would be a lot quicker way? Especially if you had one of those rings that they use. If you're a new knitter, this change of style can be confusing. And this is the purl stitch, doing it in the Continental style. Your wool already is at the front of the work, and again the wool is already there for you to loop through, but there is a little bit more movement in the purl because you actually have to move your finger down with it. Your finger on the knit style was pretty static. So I think you can see that this would be faster if you did it all the time. You may decide you want to learn this style and change and knit faster. Give it a try. We're halfway through, but keep watching because I'm going to show you my favourite tip at the end. You'll be surprised. Lots of little things can make a big difference in how quickly you knit. For example, pulling the yarn from the centre of the ball comes out really easily, and you don't have to worry about your wool rolling all over the floor where you have to keep going and picking it up and gathering it back. It will just slide out of here, and that helps you to knit a bit more quickly. The way you hold your hands and your hand movements make a big difference. If you're holding your hands a long way back, letting your needles just be floppy around here, everything's going to be much slower. Every time you move your needle in your hand, it has to go a lot further. These exaggerated movements just make everything slower. Every time you let your needle drop and do this, it's all so much slower. So if you rest your needle in the crook of your arm, and then if you have your stitches to the end of the needle and your hands close up to the points, all of these things will make you knit faster. Oh, and as I was demonstrating earlier there, see that wool just split that stitch. And another thing that speeds you up is if you deal with your mistakes straight away. So I noticed immediately that that wool had split my stitch. If I had not dealt with it, if I had waited and then 2 rows down saw that it did look a mess after all and had to go back down and do something with it, that would have taken a lot longer. Try to keep all your hand movements very small. Keep your hands up close to the tips of the needles where you're doing your work. It all helps with your speed. You can also keep your hand entirely on your work and just reach out with your finger to put the wool around. Again, another way of being faster. The best advice is to practice. Knit often to build that muscle memory. Begin with small projects, ones that use simple stitches such as garter stitch and stocking stitch. If you begin with wool like this, that's a little chunkier, your knitting technique might not be the fastest, but your piece of work will grow quicker. and that's more satisfying. This is my last tip. You'd be surprised to know that it's actually not teaching you anything about physically knitting. It's really about the mindset. Because when you begin, it seems like all you do is look at your rows carefully, see how many you've knitted, and all that watching and trying to will it into growing a bit faster. Somehow it makes it seem like it grows very slowly. So my favourite thing to do while I'm knitting is to occupy myself with something else. So sometimes I just watch the TV while I'm knitting, or sometimes listen to music on the radio or CDs. Another thing I would recommend are audiobooks. And so I love to read, and I actually like to physically read rather than listen. But you know, sometimes when I'm using my hands for other things, then it has to be an audiobook. So this is one of my favourite books. It's called Mountain by Charles Frazier. I've read this more than once. I've also, I own this book on CD, and I know it's available as an audiobook. Everybody's taste in books is different. I just particularly like this one. There is a movie about it as well, but the book is much better. It's just a pleasure to read. My tip would be, find a book that you like, listen to it on audio, and I will put a link to this book. Use these tips and you'll be knitting faster. I hope you have a fabulous time knitting. I hope you get speedier. Don't focus on how much you've got done. Just let it go. You'll be surprised how quickly it starts to grow. Let me know in the comments which you think's the best tip.